Okay, episode 11 of the Tree Peakers podcast. We're going to kind of pick up where we left off, reading some articles out of Tribal Bigfoot. I was going through this and came across a few that were just dynamite. Got to share them, okay? So, let's start. Let's start with a passage from Leif Erikson. Okay, Leif Erikson of the Vikings over 1,000 years ago in his diaries of his travels. Okay, so we're going to start with an excerpt from Leif Erikson's diaries from over 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years before America was discovered by Christopher Columbus. All right, think about that. Let's listen to what Leif Erikson had to say in his writings. Okay. A fellow named Ray Crow wrote about the exploits of the Viking explorer Leif Erikson and his relationship to Bigfoot in the track record. Here we go. It is a little-known historical fact that the first Sasquatch encounter was perhaps observed by the Vikings who settled on the island of Newfoundland in eastern Canada. Leif Erikson, or Leif the Lucky, son of Eric the Red, and his crew of Norsemen landed on the rugged shores on the Rock some 1,000 years ago, becoming the first Europeans to set foot in the Western world that we know of. Anywho, right? I'm sure that's a whole nother story. Let's not go down that rabbit hole. Let's see here. Leif kept a record of his journey across the Atlantic from Iceland to Greenland, and of his experiences whilst in Newfoundland, the last point of land on his voyage. Among his accounts, Leif told of seeing huge hairy men who towered over him and his berserker crew. And then in quotations it says here, and the Vikings were known to be very, very large men. You think of a modern day Viking, someone like Brock Lesnar, or there's a cat who I seen recently on David Blaine had this like 6-part special or whatever on Hulu, and this guy was like known as like the last Viking or whatever, and he's jumping off of these huge cliffs into like ice ponds and shit. Super crazy. You got to check that out. But anywho, yes, the Vikings are known to be mammoth men. And let's read this part again here, okay? Among his accounts, Leif, meaning Leif Erikson, the Viking from over 1,000 years ago, Leif told of seeing huge hairy men who towered over him and his berserker crew, and the Vikings were known to have been very large men. The huge hairy men, according to Leif, lived in the woods and had a rank odor and a deafening shriek. Apparently, Leif had several sightings of the huge hairy men before departing the island. What did we talk about yesterday on episode 10? The blood-curdling scream, the howl, the shriek. We didn't mention the whooping, okay? We left that part out. You'll hear a lot of the whooping in Sierra sounds. People have heard it in their one-on-one encounters or experiences out in the wilderness when they come across these beings. But this is fantastic. This is just incredibly fascinating. I'm going to read this one more time for those of you who are interested. Let's just do this one more time, okay? This is an excerpt from Leif Erikson, the Viking from over 1,000 years ago. We thought yesterday, reading from the book, 1870s were a long time ago, which they are, right? The early 1900s, the 1830s. I mean, that's a long time ago. This is from over 1,000 years ago, depicting a Sasquatch encounter. Not just one, multiple, okay? Landing on the shores of Newfoundland, Canada, over 1,000 years ago, okay? One more time. It is little-known historical fact that the first Sasquatch encounter was perhaps observed by the Vikings who settled on the island of Newfoundland in eastern Canada. Leif Erikson, or Leif the Lucky, son of Eric the Red, and his crew of Norsemen landed on the rugged shores on the Rock some 1,000 years ago. This is historical fact. This isn't someone, just making shit up here, okay? Some 1,000 years ago, becoming the first Europeans to set foot in the Western world. Leif kept a record of his journey across the Atlantic from Iceland to Greenland, and of his experiences whilst in Newfoundland, the last point of land on his voyage. Among his accounts, Leif told of seeing huge hairy men who towered over him and his berserker crew, and the Vikings are known to have been very large men. The huge hairy men, according to Leif, lived in the woods, had a rank odor. A rank odor, there's that smell I was talking about yesterday, right? That's accompanied with these beings. Not every experience, but many talk about this rank odor. This rancid meat, dying animal smell, right? Rotting flesh smell, whatever it is, right? The huge hairy men, according to Leif, lived in the woods and had a rank odor and a deafening shriek. Apparently, Leif had several sightings of the huge hairy men before departing the island. Incredible. Just incredible. We got a few other things to go over here. Probably spend a half hour on reading some of this tonight for episode 11. Let's see here. All right, that one's a little long. We'll save that for another time. There's one that I've seen here. There's Theodore Roosevelt's story here. That's one of the best. I mean, I might read this one here because this one's incredible. Let me see here. There was one I came across just a few minutes ago that really I had come across before, but I had also seen it in yeah, here it is, from Reverend Elkanah Walker. Elkanah, kind of a hard name. That first name is hard to pronounce. Let's just call him Reverend Walker. I heard this story also in the documentary A Flash of Beauty. It's one of the best Bigfoot documentaries that have been made. There's part 1 and part 2. I think A Flash of Beauty part 2 is called Paranormal Bigfoot. Part 1 is called A Flash of Beauty. Great documentaries. If you haven't seen them, I suggest checking them out if you're into this subject. So let's just say Reverend Walker, from Reverend Walker's diary. Here we go. The Reverend, a missionary to the Spokane Indians in Washington, wrote a letter in April 1840 about a story that he heard. The correspondence, part of the permanent archive at the Holland Library at Washington State University, is reprinted from Washington Magazine, October 1998. The narrative is as follows. So this is from Reverend Walker's diary, April 1840. His time spent with the Spokane Indians in Washington. Once again, April 1840. Here we go. I suppose you will bear with me if I trouble you with a little bit of their superstition, meaning the Spokane Indians, which has recently come to my knowledge. They believe in the existence of a race of giants, which inhabit a certain mountain off to the west of us. The account that they give of these giants will in some measure correspond with the biblical account of this race of beings. They say their track is about 1.5 feet long. They will carry 2 or 3 beams upon their back at once. They frequently come in at night and steal salmon from their nets and eat them raw. If people are awake, they always know when they are coming very near by their strong smell. What is this? April 1840? Talking about that smell again? The same smell that Leif Erikson of the Vikings described in his diary from 1,000 years ago? Come on, man. This is crazy stuff, dude. What's so crazy about it is it's fact. It's not, it's not fiction. It's not made up. It's historical fact. And that's what's paramount out of all of this right here, okay? Let's go here. Let's read this again. They frequently come in at night and steal salmon from their nets and eat them raw. If the people are awake, they always know when they are around or coming very near by their strong smell, which is most intolerable. It is not uncommon for them to come in at night and give 3... What is this? What does it continue here? And give 3 whistles, and then stones will begin to hit their houses. The people believe that they are still troubled with their nocturnal visits, We need prayers of the church at home. And that's from Reverend Walker's diary, April 1840, from visiting with the Spokane Indians in Washington State. Incredible. Just incredible, man. I got another article here from the Bear Lake Democrat, Paris, Indiana, October 20th, 1883. If I can show you this. This is a scan from a newspaper article. Super hard to read. It is very small print, but we can give it a go here. I'm going to check something real quick. Okay, just make sure that's still going. Everything's good. Let's give it a whirl. Newspaper article, A Queer Family, reported October 20th, 1883, in the Bear Lake Democrat, Paris, Idaho. Pardon me, not Indiana, Idaho. I seen the ID, I think, for the abbreviation of the state, but I was mistaken. It's Idaho. It clarifies it down here. I think IN would probably be for Indiana. But I don't know what a queer family exactly means, but let's read and figure it out. It's titled A Queer Family. This is, once again, from the Bear Lake Democrat, Paris, Idaho, October 20th, 1883. Here we go. Talking to a mother of 3 children who are part man and part animal. What does it say? Consoling? I don't know what this word is. The ink bleeds together and it's kind of tough here. Edward P. Strong, for some time past, have been traveling through portions of Florida, Alabama, and Mississippi. This is too tough. It's too tough to read. I thought I could get it, but if you can see, the print is so damn small. I thought I was going to be able to get through it, but it is like ridiculously tiny. If you can see here, I'll try to show the camera. This print is big, and you can see it, right? Which is titled A Queer Family, reported October 20th, 1883. But when you really try to read the letters here, I'm going to need a magnifying glass. I thought I could read it, but just the start of it is too difficult. 3 gentlemen are the emissaries of a grand syndicate, or at least so they claim, which has been formed in Minnesota for the purpose of buying. Yeah, it's too tough. Maybe my eyes are getting bad. At 38 years old, maybe my eyes are a little worse for wear than I think. I'm going to need a, let's see here real quick. So on the next page, it is in bigger lettering here. It is you can see it there. Maybe it clarifies what it's talking about. Let's read this part. A Queer Family. An article from Bear Lake Democrat, Paris, Idaho, October 20th, 1883, shown on the following page, outlines what appears to be a female with 3 Bigfoot-like offspring in the swampy rural area of Louisiana. They were heard to laugh. It was a human laugh, evidently, but still it was so hollow and unearth-like that it sent a chill or terror through us all. Their physical description followed. Their heads were shaped like human beings, but the mouth and nose coming together, broad and thick. They bore the shape and semblance of a bear, being covered entirely with long, coarse black hair. It's a very odd story, but worth including in this historical perspective. Now, that's just like an excerpt of this whole newspaper article, which I thought I could read. I do apologize for the kind of the blank moment there as I was trying to figure out if I could read this tiny writing, but I'm going to need a magnifying glass to get through that one. So, let's see here. I've got Theodore Roosevelt's encounter here, which I guess I could read from that. It's kind of long, but first, before we do that, let's do The Wild Man from California. All right, let's check this out. Wildman, California. In any research project, one of the first items on the agenda is historical research of the records for information about the subject being studied. Many times the information from 100 years ago is more accurate than the information gathered today. You know, I mentioned something like that yesterday in episode 10. If anybody watching episode 11 now heard me say that in the modern era, or even over the last 50 to 75 years, you know, you have a lot of bullshit convoluting everything in modern society, pop culture, whatever you want to call it. You know, you got a lot of hoaxing, faking, whatever, but back, like it just says, let's read this again. Many times the information from 100 years ago is more accurate than the information gathered today. I think that's just important to note right there because it makes complete and total sense to me. Let's keep going. Newspaper articles from 100 years ago represent data from a very confined area, usually the region where the newspaper was distributed. Information wasn't dispersed as quickly or as thoroughly as it is today, and many times people in different parts of California never got to read what was happening in other parts of the state. Imagine that, like, what that's saying there is like, you know, everything was kind of confined from town to town. Think about that in our modern day, you know, in 2025 or even over the last 30 to 50 years. You know, we know everything that's going on the planet, though it be extremely, you know, distorted, the information we're getting. You don't know which side to believe or who's writing what and what's real and what's not these days. But yeah, I think this is pretty spot on what it's saying here from writer David Paulides here, author of this book, Tribal Bigfoot. So once again, right here, information wasn't dispersed as quickly or as thoroughly as it is today, and many times people in different parts of California never got to read what was happening in other parts of the state, and if they did, the news was weeks old. The literacy rate amongst state residents was a fraction of what it is in the 21st century. So that very often many people couldn't read an article when it was printed. Unless you lived in a fairly large city, news sometimes came weeks after an event, and sometimes a newspaper never arrived. To think that Bigfoot is a fabrication of the 21st century film footage from Del Norte County would be a mistake. Granted, the term Bigfoot is fairly new. I kept bringing that up yesterday, right? That's why we're hearing wild man or gorilla-like man or hairy man, right? Because we're talking, you know, stuff from 200 years ago, 150 to 100 years ago. I mean, you're not going to hear the term Bigfoot back then, right? In the late 1800s and early 1900s, Bigfoot was known as the wild man, hairy man, and a variety of other terms that proliferated across the United States and Canada, North America, for that matter. So, let's keep it going. Let's check this out. We've got news from November 18th, 1908. Wild man of the mountain robs traps of prey and commissary of supplies. Peculiar footprints left by the man animal as he flees from his would-be captor. Let's check this one out. I'm going to check something real quick. Flip this around. Okay. I think we're doing good. About 20 minutes in. So let's keep rolling. Santa Monica, November 18th. Is there a wild man roaming the mountains of the Santa Monica Range? There is, according to the story by Bertrand Bassey, who has just come down from the vicinity of Point Dume. Point Dume or Point Dume, something like that, where he has been acting as a commissary for the contractors who engaged in the construction of the Malibu Ridge Railway. Bassey says that there were frequent losses from the improvised storehouse. At first, these were attributed the thieving proclivities of coyotes and mountain squirrels. But as it was found to be impossible to trap any of these animals, further investigation was made, with the result of learning that the theft was due to some cunning hand whose movements were directed by a reasoning mind. Think about that. I mean, it's just incredible, dude. It's just incredible. Letting you know that this is not an animal. They call it the man animal up here or whatever, right? Peculiar footprints left by man animal as he flees from his would-be captor. I guess that was like the headline of the news article from November 18th, 1908, okay, out of California. But We got to read that again, because this is what I'm talking about when I'm having these discussions with people, non-believers who I come across from time to time who actually want to have this conversation, you know, who talk about it just being if it was some stupid monkey in the woods, we would have caught it by now. It's the furthest thing from that. It is something unfathomable compared to what the average person is thinking if they even give this subject a thought, right? We're talking about something cunning, something with a mind, something that has man-like qualities, right? But a master of the wilderness, right? Think about to live out there without fire, without shelter. Maybe they do live in caves and this and that, whatnot, but they survive in the wilderness, in Mother Nature, in all. They are living life the way that it was given to them since the beginning of time, as to where we evolved in ways, and I'm not saying that they haven't evolved to be the most cunning masters of the wilderness that they are today. Maybe they've always been like that. God, I don't know, right? But we went the route of technology as far back as you can go, where before it was an iPhone, it was learning how to create fire, right? And learning how to tear down trees and build structures for homes and whatever that was that led us to be human beings. But I find this fascinating, what we just read here. Let's go back and read it again. Here we go. Bassi says that there were frequent losses from the improvised storehouse. At first, they were attributed to the thieving proclivities of coyotes and mountain squirrels, but it was found to be impossible to trap any of these animals as further investigation was made, with the result of learning that the theft was due to some cunning hand whose movements were directed by a reasoning mind. He kept a strict lookout and was soon rewarded by the sight of a brown being fashioned after the form of man approaching the tent. The thing was on all fours, was devoid of clothing or such covering as might have been provided by the skin of animals, and had a face covered with hair. That's incredible. My God, that's incredible. This thing knew that it had to get down on all fours as it was sneaking up to steal some kind of food and I don't even know, whatever was in this little makeshift store that they had out there. And I mean, we're talking 1908. I mean, that's another thing I wanted to mention. These stories that are coming from the early onset of America or whatnot, right? Like when the European explorers first got here, this was a North American wilderness, right? The Native Americans and the inhabitants of this country, or even down in South America with the Maya, the Incan, and all them, they were living life off of the earth. You know, they were building structures and they were building amazing, colonies and whatnot and villages, but it was made out of stone, and it was made out of the skins of animals like teepees, and then you had amazing celestial things like Chaco Canyon here in New Mexico that the Native Americans built. But it wasn't like what was going on in Europe, right? Where they had their what they brought to America, right? Where they started building their makeshift cities and all this stuff. I mean, when they first got to North America, it was a wilderness, man. I mean, to be here during that time, it would have been a rough life, but God, would it have been amazing to have seen it all in its natural state of glory, right? In its inherent state of Eden, almost, right? Where it was just left the way that nature intended it, God, the universe, whatever you want to call it. I mean, and if these creatures aren't a product of that, just inherently, then I don't know what they are. But, you think to yourself, when you're into this subject, that you go out and you go for a hike or whatever, and you think, oh God, I'd love to see this. But I can tell you just from firsthand experience, I went out the other night, and I drove out in between the Colorado state line and in New Mexico on the La Plata Highway, and I took a drive off on a dirt road in the middle of the night, and I had thinking, oh, maybe I'll see something. You never do, right? If you're looking for it, you'll never find it. But it's still fun to go out and do it if you're into this subject or whatever, But I had a wild horse step out in front of my car, it was a good, 30 feet away or whatever. But in that moment when it did come out from behind that tree, my headlights caught it. It was terrifying. Because your mind is thinking, oh, I'm out. I want to see a Sasquatch, or I want to see whatever. But to think when the color of the horse was like a deep black with brown leg, right? So when it stepped out from behind that tree, of course my mind initially is like, but it was actually a terrifying feeling, right? And then when I seen it was a horse, obviously it's like you breathe a sigh of relief, whatever. But it was actually pretty freaky, I mean, do you really want to see one of these things? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if it would be that friendly of an experience. I think it would be more terrifying than anything. I know I didn't see anything per se with my encounter in the Bistai Badlands, but I felt the terror, and I felt how scary it is to be out there and to hear those grunts and growls and hear the snapping of the twigs and hearing them moving around us. I mean, that was utterly terrifying. Why I want to go out in the middle of the night and take a drive on one of my nights off, I guess it's a thrill. But let's continue, and I'll get back on track here, okay? Where did I leave off here? Okay, so this character, Bassie, right? It says, he kept a strict lookout and was soon rewarded by the sight of a brown being fashioned after the form of man approaching the tent. The thing was on all fours, was devoid of clothing or such covering as might have been provided by the skin of animals, and had a face covered with hair. Bassie was about to fire at the intruder when he was deterred by the close resemblance of the uninvited visitor to a man. I can't tell you how many times I've heard these stories on podcasts and whatnot where hunters, they come across these things, they set their sights on them, they're terrified, they're scared to death, they think they want to shoot them, but then when they lock eyes on them with their scope or whatever, they look so much like man, they end up dropping their rifle, dropping their gun, because they feel like they're about to commit murder. Sounds like the same thing here. Let's read that again, okay? He kept a strict lookout and was soon rewarded by the sight of a brown being fashioned after the form of man approaching the tent. The thing was on all fours, was devoid of clothing or such covering as might have been provided by the skin of animals, and had a face covered with hair. Bassie was about to fire at the intruder when he was deterred by the close resemblance of the uninvited visitor to a man. Thinking it might be a railroad laborer in disguise, he made a noise as if to frighten the thief away. Suddenly the wild man gave forth a guttural yell, rose upright on its hind legs, and disappeared into the underbrush. Nothing more was seen or heard from the mysterious half-human beast. Half-human beast. See, listen to how they describe that. In November 18th, 1908. Half-human beast, okay? Was deterred from firing, meaning firing his weapon at the intruder, when he was deterred by the close resemblance of the uninvited visitor to that of a man. Thinking it might have been a railroad laborer in disguise, he made a noise as if to frighten the thief away. Suddenly the wild man gave forth a guttural yell. What have we been talking about, right? If you listen to episode 10 and this one, it's all going to blend together here. I mean, shit, I've been talking about it since episode 1 and 3 with my buddy who was a hotshot firefighter, is a hotshot firefighter, 20-year career. He talked about the guttural yell that made the forest go silent, made him and all his buddies who were out there fighting wildfires, flown out in helicopters, hotshot firefighters, big, strong men out there. This yell, after they were first whooping, and they whooped back at it, I think, which was a big mistake. And when that Sasquatch screamed with a guttural, blood-curdling yell at them, made the entire forest go silent, and made this crew of firefighters who were in different quadrants, there were like 4 different quadrants of them, they all got on the radio, said, what the hell was that? They ended up all coming in for the night and staying together back to back because they were so freaking terrified of what had just screamed at them and made the entire forest go silent. I mean, he described, you got to go back and listen to episode 1 and 3 of the Tree Peakers podcast. They connect. My buddy, he remains anonymous. He's still in the career of fighting wildfires at a very high level, and he doesn't want his name released. That's why we did an anonymous, recording. There was no video or nothing like that. He didn't want to be on camera, didn't even want to share his name. But one of the best stories I've ever heard of all time, whether I'm listening on a podcast that isn't mine or I'm reading a book or whatever, episode 1 and 3 of the Tree Peakers podcast, one of the all-time greatest stories I've ever come across. And I was fortunate enough for him to come on my podcast and share it with me, just as he did while I was bartending one night, and he overheard me talking about the subject, called me over, and shared his experiences that he had. The more that I read, the more that I hear, there is so many similarities. It's mind-boggling how anyone who doesn't get into this subject, who just thinks it's a farce and there's nothing to it, they just haven't done the research. And that's plain and simple. There's nothing more, nothing less to it. And I don't blame them, because I don't think I gave Bigfoot a thought before I really dove in. But once you take the deep dive and you come in with an open mind, a clear and open mind, it is remarkable. Some of these stories. Now, not everybody would find this shit fascinating. For me, I don't know what it does. It's just like, maybe because I had the experience in the Bisti Badlands, and once I started hearing all the similarities and putting the pieces of the puzzle together, I know that I had some sort of an encounter like this. Hell, I've even been out with my wife while we're in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, north of New Mexico, where home base is for us, and we've found the tree breaks, right? Once you know what to look for, you're not going to see it every time. Especially, you're not going to see one of these beings, 99% of the time. It's a 1%. It's a shot in the dark, shot in a once in a lifetime experience if you get to have it. But there are some things, there are some markers and some dots that you can connect if you know what to look for, and you happen to see some of this stuff out while you're, on your travels in the wilderness. Let's see. Let's get back to this article. It's just crazy, man. Let's see here. I'll finish it up. Here we go. Bassi was about to fire at the intruder when he was deterred by the close resemblance of the uninvited visitor to that of a man. Thinking it might be a railroad laborer in disguise, he made a noise as if to frighten the thief away. Suddenly the wild man gave forth a guttural yell, rose upright on its hind legs. So he got up from all fours as he was sneaking down, right? Stood up on two legs and took off running, right? Rose upright on its hind legs and disappeared into the underbrush. Nothing more was seen or heard from the mysterious half-human, half-beast. Although the railroaders who went to the beach for a bath that morning are still wondering, what manner of animal had been there before them to leave peculiar tracks in the sand. The tracks which they photographed were not unlike those that would have been left by the hands and feet of a man were he provided with long claw-like nails for each of the 5 toes and the 4 fingers and thumb. This article brings forward many interesting points that lead to this being a Bigfoot. The article mentions impressions of the hands and feet and how they resemble those of a human, same as a Bigfoot. Bigfoot has been known to take items when the opportunity presents itself, and it apparently did in Santa Monica in the year 1908, November 18th, 1908. The description of the half-human, half-beast is a very common explanation for what people describe when they see a Bigfoot in the 21st century. Incredible. Let me check something real quick. Okay, just got a message from my wife. She will be getting off of work here soon. So let's see what we can do here. with a few more stories. I think I'll save the Theodore Roosevelt, meaning President Theodore Roosevelt. He's got one of the all-time best encounters. I do believe once we get into it, it is not his on-the-ground first-hand encounter, but it is a story he has told at a campfire from his memoirs, The Wilderness Hunter, from all of his hunting trips that he went on. He was an avid hunter of big game in North America. And President Theodore Roosevelt, in his memoirs, The Wilderness Hunter, goes into great detail about hearing a blood-curdling scream sitting around a campfire in the Montana wilderness when he's on one of his hunts. And his hunting guide, when he asks around the campfire, he says, "What the hell was that?" or whatever. His hunting guide, Bowman, I think was his name, goes on to tell him, "I was hoping I'd never hear that sound again." And there, Bowman, I believe was his name, the hunting guide to Theodore Roosevelt, President Theodore Roosevelt, Bowman goes on to describe an encounter with a Sasquatch in the Montana wilderness, the Rocky Mountains of Montana, 20 years prior to that. I think we're going way back into the 1800s on that one too, so that's going to be fun. So we'll save that for episode 12. But for now, I think I've got one or two more articles we can do. We can do. Let me read this and see what we got here, okay? Point Dume. Point Dume is a peninsula on the coast of the California coast, 14 miles west of Santa Monica, very near Malibu. The region is now completely covered in houses and people, but in the 1800s there was a significant open range starting at the Dume and heading north. So that kind of encapsulates the end of that article, because that's where that came from. That article from November 18th, 1908 was from Santa Monica, Port Dume, California. And Point Dume is a peninsula on the California coast, 14 miles west of Santa Monica, very near Malibu. The region is now completely covered in houses and people, but in the 1800s, there was a significant open range starting at the Dume and heading north. Like I said, when this country, before it was founded, and they were all just first getting here, meaning the European settlers, we are talking innate wilderness, nothing but Mother Earth in all its glory. I mean, God, what an amazing sight that would have been to see. You still see it when you go into the wilderness of the Rocky Mountains, the Sierra Nevadas, the Adirondacks, any of this stuff that is the what we would call nowadays the national forests or whatnot, that are protected land, by the U.S. government or whatever. And even there, you get into the Missing 411 stories, Missing 411, by the same author of these books, David Paulides. Now, that's some fascinating shit too. People disappearing in the wilderness, in the national forests of North America, all around the world really. But there's a lot that goes on here in North America. So let's see here. Let's read. I got one or two more in me for tonight, and then we'll call it, okay? Episode 11 here. Let's continue. The Daily Democrat, April 9th, 1891, Woodland, California. What is it? An unheard of monstrosity seen in the woods above Rumsey. Mr. Smith, a well-known citizen of the northern Capay Valley, called on us today and tells us of the following strange story, which we would be loath to believe if it were not for the fact that he is an old acquaintance. Which we would be loath to believe if it were not for the fact that he is an old acquaintance of this office, and has always borne a spotless reputation. Several days ago, Mr. Smith, together with a party of hunters, were above Rumsey hunting. One morning, Mr. Smith started out early in the quest of game. He had not gone far when his attention was attracted by a peculiar noise that seemed to come from an oak tree that stood nearby. Looking up, Mr. Smith was startled to see gazing at him what was apparently a man clothed in a suit of shaggy fur. Having heard of wild man, Mr. Smith naturally was placed on guard, but thinking that he would see what virtue there was in kindness, he called the supposed man to come down, as he was filled with nothing but the kindest motives. The speech did not have the desired effect, rather the opposite, for the strange thing gave grunts of unmistakable anger. Believing that discretion was the better part of valor, our informed stood not upon the order of his going, but went at once in a bee line for the camp. After placing some distance between himself and the strange creature, the hunter turned around just in time to see it descend from the tree. Upon reaching the ground, instead of standing upright as a man would, it commenced to trot along on the ground as a dog or any other animal would do. Smith then realized that it was no hermit he had seen, but some kind of monstrosity such he had never heard of, much less seen before. The hunter stood amazed and spellbound for the moment, but soon gathered his scattered sense again and was soon making his best speed to the camp, where in a few breathless words were telling his companions of what he had seen. They were disposed to laugh at him at first, which is the first reaction to anyone telling anybody about an honest-to-God Bigfoot encounter, is you get laughed at. I have it happen to me on the regular. It doesn't bother me one bit. They were disposed to laugh at him at first, but his sincereness of manner and his blanched cheeks soon proved to them that he had seen something out of the usual order of things. A hasty council was held, and the party decided to go in search of the monster. So taking their guns and dogs, they were piloted by Mr. Smith, to whom they soon came in sight of the unnamed animal. In the meantime, it had commenced to devour the contents of Mr. Smith's game bag that he had dropped in his hasty retreat. The creature would plunge its long arms or legs into the bag, and pulling forth the small game that was in it, transferred it to its mouth in the most disgusting manner. An effort was made to set the dogs upon it, but they crouched at their master's heels and gave vent to the most piteous of whines. Incredible. These dogs were terrified. They were terrified of what that thing was. The whines attracted the attention of the nondescript, and it commenced to make the most unearthly yells and screams, at the same time fleeing to the undergrowth, some half a mile distant, upon which the whole party immediately gave chase. They soon gained upon the strange beast, and it, seeing that such was the case, suddenly turned, and sitting upon its haunches, commenced to beat its breast with its hairy fists. Crazy, just like a fucking gorilla or something, right? Once it pulled up, sapling 5 inches though at the base, and snapping it in twine, brandished the lower parts of its head, much of the same manner a man would swing a club. The hunters, seeing that they had a creature with strength of a gorilla to contend with, the beastie with a... Okay, let's read this again. The way that they kind of talk back in the day is tough to read sometimes. Once it pulled up, sapling 5 inches though at the base, and snapping it in twine. Once it pulled up a sapling 5 inches though at the base, and snapping it in twine. Okay, so I think it picked up a stick and snapped it in two or something. That's what I think happened. Brandished the lower parts of it over its head. Okay, so it's got a fucking stick and it's waving it around like this, right? What did I say yesterday? Neanderthal, caveman. They're describing it as gorilla here, but, right? I mean, that's what I see in my mind's eye. Brandished the lower parts of it over its head, much after the same manner a man would swing a club. The hunters, seeing that they had a creature with strength of a gorilla to contend with, beat a hasty retreat back to camp, which soon broke up, fearing a visit from their chance acquaintance. Mr. Smith describes the animal as being about 6 feet high when standing, which it did not do perfectly, but bent over, after the manner of a bear. Its head was very much like that of a human being. The trapeze muscles were very thick and aided much in giving the animal its brutal look. The brow was low and contracted, while the eyes were deep set, giving it a wicked look. This is crazy. This is just crazy. And this story is from April 9th, 1891. Incredible. Just incredible. It was covered with long, shaggy hair except the head, where the hair was black and curly. Mr. Smith says that of late sheep and hogs, to a considerable extent, have disappeared in his vicinity, and their disappearance can be traced to the hiding place of the What Is It. Among those who have suffered are Henry Sharp, Jordan Shummer, Herman Lade, and J.C. Trendle. Here is a chance for some energetic young men to start a dime museum and acquire a fortune with a very few years. Anyone wishing to learn more about this peculiar monstrosity can do so by calling on our informant, who will no doubt take a delight in piloting them to the dangerous vicinity of the late scene of action. And once again, this story from the Daily Democrat out of Woodland, California, April 9th, 1891. Come on, man. They're not making shit up that long ago. It's just not happening. The immense detail, the descriptive nature of each of these stories, and how terrifying it is for the chance encounter of these people who happen to come across these beings in all these stories. Utterly fascinating, man. I mean, it is for me, and if you're checking out these videos, maybe you think so too. Let me see here. There's just so much more of these newspaper articles. If I can show you this one, this will be the last thing I read here. The Annual Register, 1832, miscellaneous articles, it says. If I can show you that right there. Okay, it's a news clipping article here. Let's do this last one because it's short and sweet here. American Expedition of Discovery. The expedition sent out by the American government in 1820 to 1821 to explore the Rocky Mountains and north of the Newman Line has at length been heard of after an absence of 11 years. The company landed at Green Bay and wintered, went by Prairie du Chien to St. Anthony's Falls, Mississippi, went up St. Peter's 200 miles in search of lead mines, where they discovered several very valuable ones. Wintered there, went down to the same river and also the Mississippi to the mouth of the Missouri, then up the Missouri to the foot of the Rocky Mountains, wintered there, and continued to the middle of August, then crossed the mountains and were west 8 years, while traveling by the frozen ocean and having been over into Asia south, towards the head of Columbia River, where they were overtaken by a storm and compelled to build houses and stay there for 9 months, 6 of which the sun never rose, and the darkness was as great as during our nights. The snow part of the time was 14 feet deep, and the company were compelled to eat 41 of their pack horses to prevent starving, whilst the only food the horses had was birch bark, which the company carried to them by walking across the snow with snowshoes. After crossing the mountains, they passed 386 different Indian tribes, some perfectly white, some entirely covered with hair, who were among the most singular and so wild that the company were compelled to run them down with horses. Okay, so I was wondering where this was going to turn into a Bigfoot thing. So let's check this out one more time. Once again, 1832, the Annual Register from 1832. The Annual Register, Minnesota, 1832, reproduced from the track record. Okay, I was wondering where that was going. It's the first time I'm reading it. So, an American expedition of discovery from 1820 to 1821 to explore the Rocky Mountains. You heard all the places they went. Now let's go over this shit one more time. The snow part of the time was 14 feet deep, and the company were compelled to eat 41 of their pack horses to prevent starving, whilst the only food the horses had had was birch bark, which the company cut and carried to them by walking on the snow with snowshoes. After crossing the mountains, they passed 386 different Indian tribes, some perfectly white, some entirely covered with hair. Who were amongst the most singular and so wild that the company were compelled to run them down with horses. Of the company, 5 died by sickness, 1 by breaking a wild horse, 1 by the fall of a tree, and 15 were killed by the Indians. The total of 22. 10 of the 19 survivors are lame, some by accident. Whatever that means. So this article that I ended with today doesn't talk about blood-curdling screams. It doesn't talk about footprints. It doesn't talk about any of that. But what it does describe is an expedition in North America from 1820 to 1822 that spent brutal winters, right? Had to go through brutal winters and up and down the Mississippi and the Missouri River and from Green Bay, Wisconsin to the Rocky Mountains. One more time, let's read this last part. The snow part of the time was 14 feet deep. The company were compelled to eat 41 of their pack horses to prevent starving. So we're talking a brutal, brutal winter that these men had to go through. So they had to eat their pack horses to survive, okay? But the most important part of this whole thing, after crossing the mountains, meaning the Rocky Mountains, they passed 386 different Indian tribes, some perfectly white, some entirely covered with hair, who were among the most singular and so wild that the company were compelled to run them down with horses. We're going to leave it there. That's just incredible. It makes me wonder too, like, if you could have come across them like that as tribes back then, living amongst the populace, you know, in the wild, that they had communities, the same way that the European settlers butchered the elk population, decimated, I should say, the elk population and the buffalo and the animals that they just, you know what I'm saying, how they just killed everything. I wonder if they annihilated so many of these beings, these wild men, that they went into hiding for real, right? It seems to me as if something like that, reading that, they could have lived amongst the Indian tribes in harmony, maybe sometimes at war, maybe not in harmony, I don't know. But I've heard of the Native American people describing that they've had a connection with these beings for centuries, right? Long before the European settlers got here, and to this very day, I know for a fact on the Navajo reservation, right? Did the European settlers decimate a big part of these beings' population, and that is why they live in hiding. They are utterly terrified of human beings now, and rightfully so, if that is a possibility or played a part in something. I mean, just what I read there was just completely fascinating. 386 Indian tribes these expeditioners came across, and some of them were completely covered in hair and so utterly and completely wild. Just crazy. You're not going to go out in the wilderness now and find tribes of hairy men like that. If they're out there, if these beings are out there, they're so well hidden now, and they are in the far reaches of the wilderness that, I mean, what is it in the documentary A Flash of Beauty? I think they give the numbers that some 80-something% or whatever of the North American wilderness is undiscovered, has never been touched by the feet of man. I mean, who knows what could be out there? you know, for sure what I'm talking about, but with the Bigfoot subject or whatnot, but we'll get into it more. It's late, and my wife's going to be getting off from bartending here soon. It's almost 1 a.m., so we're going to call it a wrap on episode 11. If you enjoy these, I hope you enjoy them. I know there's a few of you watching. I can see from the YouTube analytics or whatnot. I appreciate you. If anybody's got any stories they want to share with me, you can send them to treepeakerspodcast@gmail.com. I'm Eddie. Thanks for hanging with me. I'll see you on episode 12. Have a good night.